Continues the Rav, V'siyum hakav hazeh lamata. So, the kav, the line, which connects at the circumference of the eagle, of the halal, at one point, from one direction, the siyum, as it enters into the halal, it's going to end at a certain point, right? In the meantime, it's going to generate all of the myriad worlds and declension of spiritual worlds, which constitutes the rest of the Otzrot Chayim. But nonetheless, the siyum, the end of the kav, where the kav ends on the other side of the circle, siyum hakav hazeh lamata, einu nogea gam kein ba'or ha'ein sof atzmo. Right? This will not intersect the Or Ein Sof on the other side, which means that if we imagine a line which runs from one point of the circumference to its polar opposite on the other side of the circumference, nonetheless that line does not actually intersect on the other side, but is actually going to stop at some point on the other side, therefore leaving an area, right? Therefore leaving a void, right, between the end of the kav, between the circumference itself on the other side. And the Ari says, what is the reason for this? She'im lo kain, because if in fact the kav, which begins at one side of the circumference, if in fact intersects at the other side of the circumference, Yaksor hadavar l'kamei shehaya. So says the Ari, everything's going to go back to its initial position, which means we're going to go back before the tzimtzum. V'yachzor v'yischap ha'or hazeh shebetech ha'chalal. So therefore, the or, which is within the halal, which is in the interior of the circle, will reunite Im or ha'ein sof yachad kabbalahTree.org, and then in fact that will reunite with the or of Ein Sof, right, which is on the circumference of the circle, right, and because of that the circle now will in fact be completely filled up with the or of the Ein Sof, and therefore we have a situation, we have a position that we initially had before the tzimtzum. In other words, basically what the Ari is saying is that if the kav actually intersects on the opposite end of the halal, then in fact we will go back to the position before the tzimtzum. We will undo the tzimtzum. We basically will undo the tzimtzum, and therefore we will back to the starting point. So therefore, says the Ari, it's essential that the kav, as it penetrates into the halal, can penetrate towards the other side, but has to stop at one point before it intersects again with the Or Ein Sof, which is on the circumference, the Or that was the stamtzem. Therefore, says the Ari, and for the same reason, the Or of the kav does not emerge from the circumference in what you would call a line which has thickness, right? It's not a two-dimensional object. Rak derech kav echad dak levad kaniska. But rather the kav, the line which emerges, has to basically be one-dimensional. It cannot be a two-dimensional object like a rectangle, a bar, but rather has to be one-dimensional. But derech hakav hazeh nimshach v'yered or ha'ein sof hamatzil. And through this kav, which is one-dimensional, which is necessarily one-dimensional, the or of the Ein Sof, the or of the infinite light, right, goes down of the matzil of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, el toicha chalal ha'ogul hazeh, into the interior of the circle, shehu hanetzal, because this is in fact that which will be in the circle that is going to be that which is created, which means there has to be a distinction between the creator and the creation. So there is a connection between the matzil and netzal, between the creator and the creation, yachad, v'lo oid, but only one connection. What does it mean v'lo oid? Not more than that. Okay, what the Ari is coming to tell us is the following thing. We have here a certain paradox, and this is the difficulty, or this is the paradox of creation, which in fact the Ari wants to explain how in fact the Tzimtzum will in fact resolve this paradox. On one hand, there has to be a distinction between the creator and the creation. There has to be a creation. There has to be a meaning to creation. If there's no meaning to creation, then in fact, what's the purpose of the Tzimtzum? The purpose of the Tzimtzum is to create worlds, as the Ari has already told us, and therefore there has to be a distinction between creator and creation. On the other hand, there has to be a connection between the creator and the creation. If there's in fact a gap, an unbridgeable gap between the creator and the creation, so there's no connection between the creator and the creation. There's no connection between the matzal and the netzal. So therefore, what we have is we have a certain paradox. We want a creation which is distinct from the creator, right? We want a boire and a nivra, a matzil and a netzal. On the other hand, there has to be a connection, a direct connection between the matzil and netzal. Now you might say, why does it have to be a direct connection? Well, we have to go back to the original purpose of creation. We spoke about in a previous year that the purpose of creation, as the Ri speaks about in the Chayim, is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu looked to perfect himself in his different attributes, and by virtue of that, he created a creation through which HaKadosh Baruch Hu would reach what's called shleimus as different midas. We spoke about it in detail. So therefore, the purpose of creation, kiviyachol, is that the nivroyim, the creations, come to bring, of course, this all mitzidenu, and I'm emphasizing this, we spoke about this in detail before that the creations are coming to perfect the creator. If there's no connection between the creation and the creator, so the very purpose of creation cannot occur. So therefore, there has to be in the wording of the Tzimtzum and the Kav, there has to be a connection between the creator and the creation. But this connection, in a certain sense, has to be a connection which, as I would put it, is something which exists, but on the other hand, is something which is very, very much hidden, to use an understatement. So the connection has to be a point. A point is a geometrical object which expresses not a nothingness, but not much more than a nothingness. A somethingness, but not much more than a nothingness. So therefore, the intersection, the emergence of the kav from the circumference has to be one point. Therefore, it can't be it cannot be a geometrical object of more than zero dimension, of more than the point. It has to be, the intersection has to be one point, which is zero dimension. The line that emerges from it has to be one dimension. If the line which emerges is two-dimensional, then the point of intersection is one-dimensional, and that already destroys this delicate paradox between differentiation, dichotomy between creating creation, and connection between creating and creation. In the same vein, the kav cannot intersect the circumference on the other side, because if it intersects the circumference on the other side, so the connection basically is two points which define a line, and therefore the connection is one-dimensional. And then once again, we've actually upset the balance between distinction of creator and creation and between connection of creator and creation. So therefore, everything the Ari is saying over here is in fact very delicate but very precise. There's not an extra word or less than needs to be said. So therefore, the insistence is on the point of intersection, which has to be 1.0 dimension.